All right. All right. Welcome to the August meeting of the Wake County Beekeepers Association. This is the monthly meeting where we talk about all the ways that you can play with stinging insects. So a bunch of crazy people, everybody in the right place. All right. I thought so. Okay. Tonight, we're going to mix it up a little bit. We're going to do the business portion first. Normally, we do the workshop, but hopefully that doesn't mess anyone up. And then we got the beginner workshop with Gordon on winter preparation. And then we're going to talk about small hive beetles. We have Jennifer Keller here from NCSU. And then we're going to wrap it up. Okay, so first up is the treasury report. I'm going to ask Susan Benton to give that.
Thank you, Jim. As you can see, I decided I had not used the petty cash in over a year, so I deposited that money into our bank account. Our bank balance is $23,264.16. We have deposits of memberships through the website of $62. Some of that I need to send to the State Beekeepers Association. We sold one hat, and I had one member pay by check. That's the $20. We had a donation for the beehive that Darren donated to us of $125, and the petty cash that I put in the bank. Our expenditures were the service fees of $1.67. We spent $131.50 repairing one of the extractors. We gave donations, two donations of $100 each to the American Brain Tumor Association and the North Carolina Agriculture Foundation. And I paid our insurance to, it's not State Farm, Farm Bureau for the year. And not included in the totals above, because I did them in August, we are purchasing a canopy that's going to have the club's logo on it and name. And we've paid $982.53 for that. And I sent $15 to the State Beekeepers Association. I still will owe the State Beekeepers Association some more money for memberships that I haven't paid. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Susan. I'm going to do Gordon's chart because it's easy. We have 381 members now. So renewals aren't due till December unless you're not a member right now. Let's see. So new, if you saw it in the newsletter, we have these nice looking badges. I'm going to zoom in here. You can print those out on the website. I went through the process, so if I can do it, I think you could probably do that too. Oh, let's see. This is Kim Rossi's hive, and next month we're going to have a raffle. We haven't discussed what the raffle ticket prices are going to be, but we didn't want to do this one as a door prize because we want somebody who actually wants bees. So I think Dennis Carter is keeping those right now. So keep that in mind for next month. We also knew this year we have a recognition program for beekeepers. Tom Wells is running that. He wanted me to mention that nomination forms will be available in September. So I want you to think about that and who you might want to nominate. 2023 WCBA Officer Selection Committee. I mentioned this last month. This the only difference this week, I actually have their contact information. So all the positions are, well, not, I shouldn't say all the positions, right? There are some positions that are not open.
Any position, just let us know.
Yeah.
And we can kind of juggle out just for the one interested or something like that.
Okay, yeah. So he's basically saying that if you're interested in any position, just let us know, and then we'll figure it out from that point.
I mean, I honestly just think that I have not gotten interest yet. It's really worrying me to have no interest, no nomination, positions that need somebody in there. So I really need you to think for yourself. Do you want to volunteer for the club? Do you want to help? If so, there's ways for you to help.
Yeah, so Chris is saying that he's not getting any volunteers yet. But there's definitely places for you. We need you. I mean, I was thinking of the president position, and Chris Hagwood would make a great president, you know? Yeah, so anyway, Tony, where's Tony? Tony Gladys. He's actually, I was thinking of him. He'd make a good president too. He's working our state fair committee right now. There he is. So anyway, he's doing a great job with that. Anyway, if you're interested, you do get a chance in October to nominate people from the floor, but we'd really like the committee to be able to, you know, get some input and get some volunteers ahead of time. They're going to present a slate and we're going to vote on them in October. Help wanted, as always, we need speakers to get on the speaker list. You go to that URL there, tinyurl.com, WCBA speakers 22. Just take a snapshot of this if you want the websites. State Fair display booth. Actually, Tony Gaddis had something to present about that. Wait.
After the newsletter went out, another letter got sent out to everyone in the association. I hope you'll take a look at it. It had the pointer to the list of things that we need for the booth. Right now, we don't have a lot of people signed up yet, so please take a look at that email. Our booth is only going to be as good as all the goodies that you can give us. And you know, there's a whole list of things. And I guess the other thing just to mention, if you weren't here last time, Danny has won a blue ribbon on every one of the categories for everything. So if you want to win a blue ribbon, this is the gentleman here that can tell you how, if you want to do what, you can get a blue ribbon for it. And more blue ribbons the booth gets, that's good. So anyway, please take a look at that email and list and things that you might be able to sign up for to put on display in the booth, and we'd really appreciate it. Thank you. If you have any questions too, you can catch me after the meeting.
Thanks, Tony. So next is Honeybee Day, and that's this Saturday. And I looked for the signups, and there is zero. It's just Susan by herself. So she's going to need to go to the restroom at some point. So we need somebody else there. I know I might be able to stop by in the morning. I know I'm treating hives on the farm, and I can come back by there, but I'm not sure what time that's going to be.
Yeah, if you don't sign up, but you find yourself available on Saturday, just come by. If you've never volunteered to talk about honeybees at a table for people who come up to see pictures or whatever I have on display, it's actually a lot of fun. And you know more than you think you do. You know a lot more than the common public. And it's really fun. Of course, I like talking about honeybees. So we set a sign up. We're going to be there from 9 to 4. It will be, I'm going to say it's on the right end on the farmer's market past the plants. So just come. If you want to come and talk bees, we'll be glad to have you. Saturday, like this coming Saturday at the State Farmers Market off Lake Wheeler Road. Okay. No, it's not at the State Farmers. It's not at the State Fairgrounds. It's the State Farmers Market. So there's a big shelter there, and it's down there past the plants, on to the right of the plants. Okay.
So will they be able to sell honey there? That maybe that will entice.
There is an option. When I registered for the booth, I did not check the box to sell honey. There's a $20 fee to sell products. However, it's payable on that day, so we can always change your mind. So if you have any honey you want to sell, bring it. Well, somebody will have to pay the $20 fee, but that would be fine too.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Next is Bug Fest. And so we're all signed up for that. And I've got a URL there for that. These are all on Sign Up Genius. And I think I'm the only one signed up for that. So I may want to go to the restroom. So you get a free t-shirt with that one. So that one, there's some, yeah, so it's like this one. I don't know. Okay, so this is the upcoming events. We talked about Honey Bee Day. The Kim Rossi Celebration of Life is going to be at, what is it? Cary Garden Supply. Okay, they're calling it Apex Garden Center now? I thought it was Cary Garden Supply. Yeah, I think it's like closer to Apex than Cary, but. Oh, yes. So in the newsletter, if you check in the newsletter, there is an RSVP where you click just to, I don't think they're going to care if you don't do it, but it'd be courteous if you do. So that's at 3 p.m. And then I think they're going to Landmark Tavern afterwards. I don't think you would have to go to both, obviously. August 21st is Hands on the Hive. Ben Crawley will be out at Oakview County Park, right, for that. And you can do the written test and the practicals for that. Again, Bugfest set on the 17th. A new one, we're not sure we're going to do this. Possibly, we need somebody to coordinate that. We got somebody in mind.
Okay. Hey, I'm Catherine. I spoke with Jessica from Farm Aid, and she's going to give me some more details because I'm able to do it and I'm a farmer as well. So that's something that I participate in anyway. So as soon as I get more details from her, I'll pass them along if we need more people or more stuff or any of that.
All right, thanks, Catherine. That's great. Yeah, so I don't know if they'll be providing tables or tents, or I don't know anything about it yet. So yeah, just let us know. And then after that's the state fair, I think we're going to have a meeting tonight at 9 o'clock to talk about that some more. And most of this is talked about in the newsletter, so see the details in there. Upcoming conferences. Well, you know, if you didn't go to the state conference, you missed a lot of information. I was surprised at how much that I didn't know. Let's see, one example. So what do you do for laying workers? A lot of people say, you know, everybody says you take your hive and you move it somewhere else and you dump all the bees out and then you put your hive back up in the original location. And those laying workers are, they're all nurse bees, right? So they can't find their way home. Well, actually, they're foragers. So that's one of the researchers there was telling us that. And he says, those laying workers are going to be back at that hive, you know, before you are. So basically, he was saying that didn't work. There was a lot of little things like that. So it really pays off to go to these conferences. Also, EAS was just last week. I missed that, so I can't really say anything about that. I am registered for this one, January 6th and 7th. This is going to be huge. This is going to be bigger than EAS. They've already got 1,000 registered. They're looking at capping it at 1,600. They're saying that 200 people will just be the vendors. So it's just going to be big. Yeah. So anyway, it's a good time of year to go. You're not doing anything with your bees. Meeting dates. So September 13th, we're going to have Betsy Spencer, Raising Queens and Selective Breeding. That should be good. Betsy Spencer was she was speaking at the first meeting that I ever went to, WCBA meeting. So October 11th is Honeybee Colony as a Superorganism, Randall Austin. And election night, we do the Zoom thing. I don't know what we're going to do that night or who's presenting, and holiday gathering is December 13th. Okay, now we're going to talk about how to prepare your bees for winter with Gordon.
Well, good evening, one and all. Can you hear me okay? Welcome to our lovely club meeting. Let me get my screen share here up for. Did you already stop sharing?
Yes.
And why can I see it then? There it is. There it is. Okay. Great. Okay. Well, Jennifer's behind me and she has a much more excellent presentation, but I'll go ahead and talk and spend as much time as I can. This can you talk about a long time if you can about this, but this is a very important topic on winter preparations. What we use here is this is a method that's really been created by Rick Bordeaux, and I call Rick Bordeaux as the chemist and biologist and beekeeper extraordinaire. Now, he was going to be here tonight, but I didn't see him walk in. Has he shown in? Is Rick here? And I am just a student of the Bordeaux method for how you take care of your bees in the wintertime from that standpoint. So we're going to talk about 2 beehives and how do I make sure I get them through the winter? First question is, how well do your hives survive the winter? Any comments? Great, right? Not so great. Well, before I took on the Bordeaux method, I was in the general mess pile of it, and this is the latest Bee Informed partnership. And if you look down on the bottom left-hand corner, backyard beekeeper, which is where most of us are, we may have a few exceptions. It says up here the red line, the blue line is winter. And so for many years, it's been hovering around 40% of all backyard beekeepers lose their 40% of their hives in the wintertime. So that means 60% make it. That's math, by the way. On which one? Okay. So the question is, how do we improve those odds so we can get most of our hives to the wintertime? Because it's very costly. When I first became a beekeeper, I was losing my hives in the wintertime a lot. But now with the Bordeaux method, I'm not. Now, just to be clear, this is a method Rick has developed. I've added a little bit to it. We've done it. He's done it for 9 years. I've done it for 3 years. And I'll show you the results in just a minute. But there are other things you can do. The key is you pay attention to it. You focus on some things. You try to make it happen. So this is Rick's survival record. This is the drum roll. Okay, so last year, 100%, 100%, 100%. So out of 9 years of doing it, he's only lost 1 hive in the wintertime through using this method. Now, Gordon, on the other hand, has been doing it 3 years, and Gordon has lost 2 hives in 3 years, but only 2. And the reason I lost those 2 hives were because of the bad beekeeper. Because what I did is I didn't combine a weak hive in the fall. I said, I can get that hive through the winter. So what I did is I took a brood frame and a honey frame from a good hive, and I put it in the weak nuke in November. So how do you think I did? They both died. So lesson learned, I should have combined the weak hive with the stronger hive, but I might have gotten 8 through the winter that year instead of 7 through the winter instead of 6 from that standpoint. So Rick's success rate is 96.67, a little better than 60%. And my rate as a student, of course, should be less. So I'm 91.3. Right. So those are things I think it's worth paying attention to the way Rick has done it, and because it has a lot of merit and some good data behind it. What are some reasons your hives died during the winter or early spring? Any want to shout anything out? Starving? Mites? Why do hives die over the winter? Too much moisture in the hive. What happens is the hive has warmth in it because the bees keep it warm, and as that vapor rises, it hits the top of the hive where it's colder, it condenses and drips down on the bees. And so you want to be able to control the moisture in the hive in the wintertime so you don't get bees to freeze through too much cold moisture on the hive. Too many bees, too few bees to sustain the colony. You have to make the hard decisions in November. Are there enough bees to sustain through the winter? And you have to make a judgment call and then act on that judgment call. From that standpoint, the queen can die. You can have the best queen in the world, and sometimes queens die without anything we did wrong. That just happens. So sometimes the queen will die on you. Starvation, which you've heard about, that happens from obviously not having enough food, or they're having enough food in the hive, but they don't get to it for some reason. High load of varroa mites. And the last one, the beekeeper. And I've certainly done enough of those things myself. I'm sure you haven't, but I have, so I can make up for the ones you haven't done that can impact how your bees survive the winter or not survive the winter. Okay, so winter prep should begin in July or August. So if you haven't started, you do need to start now thinking about it, because we are 6 months when the red maples start blooming. Danny always tells us, Danny or John, Dr. Knox, Mr. Knox, or whoever, February. sometime in February, the red maples start blooming. And we're about 6 months opposite of that. So we have to be planning for 6 months ahead, because I would like my beehives all to be there when the red maples start blooming. And then the other things follow behind them from that standpoint. So 5 steps for winter preparation. We're going to talk about here briefly: combine the weak with the strong hive, reduce hive space, control varroa mites, ventilate the hive, feed as needed. These are very complex thoughts. This is pretty simple stuff, just organized in a plan that you need, that we then do go out and execute. We start with the first one: combine weak with a strong hive. Take your losses in the fall. You've probably heard that. Last year, I combined 1 weak hive with a strong hive. All 7 that I had on November 15th got through the winter, and are actually, for the most part, did well in the springtime. Take your losses in the fall. Don't combine weak with weak hive. I'm sure you've heard that before, but that's very important, because intuitively, as you know, it takes 2 small guys to make 1 strong hive. Well, that's not the way it works. It's not with bees. You combine a weak with a strong, and you overwinter with your best queens. A best queen, you can look at them, but obviously younger queens are good queens. So ones from this year as opposed to prior years. And you want to take the young queen as you can through the winter, or best as strong as queen as you can. So you look at your hive and try to make some judgment. So if you're going to combine hives, you want to keep the hive with a better queen, and not keep the queen in the hive that she's not as good, or it's a weak hive from that standpoint. So how do you combine them? This is just a quick tutorial to remind you, because I'm sure many of you already know this. Kill the queen in the weak hive. That may be hard for you, but you've got to remove the queen. You can always just remove the queen and put her somewhere else, and she'll die on her own if you don't want to kill her, but you have to take her out of the weak hive. You reduce the weak hive to 1 box. If you're doing 10 frame mediums or deeps, you could reduce it to 1 box. Place newspaper on top of the strong hive. I usually put a few slits on it, and then you put the weak hive on the newspaper. Not a complex method. Typically, I usually wait 24 hours or so after I take the queen out of the old hive, out of the weak hive, before I combine them, just to give them a chance for the pheromones of that queen to dissipate from that hive. Okay, now when you want to pick a strong hive, so which hive would you pick? That's very good. I picked the one on the top left because that's a strong hive. You've got 4 or 5 frames. There are lots of bees on it. You can have that. You should have that at this time of year for sure on most of your hives. And you will have on your strong hives come the fall time. And the one down here you can see is starting to not be so strong. So this is an easy decision. I'm going to combine the one down here with the one up there, because this one probably won't make it through the winter. I'm not showing you the whole hive, but based on that one data point, I would assume the one on the right-hand side is not going to make it through the winter. Okay, next you want to do is reduce the hive space. You start with a volume of 2 frame deep boxes as a starting point, and you adjust up or down depending on bee space, the bee population. And the goal here is to not give bees more space than they can defend. What happens if they have too much space and they can't defend it all? Wax moths, small hive beetles, mice, or mesas, all kinds of things can get in there and bother it up and cause you some difficulty in that. So you want to try to give them adequate space so they can defend it, particularly starting now going forward into the fall. As you remove the excess space in frames, you want to protect the comb that you remove. Remember, you've heard this from others. I'll say it again here. Your wax comb that they've spent a lot of energy creating, if you have to remove it from your hive because your hive's too small, you want to protect that, because that's very costly. I believe last month, I'm going to have this wrong, was it 7 gallons to make 7 pounds of honey to make 1 pound of wax, right? So it's a very costly resource, so you want to protect it. There's several ways to protect it. The first thing you do is freeze it. I freeze all the combs I take out of the hive I'm going to store for the winter. I do it at least 24, I do it usually 48 hours. They say a minimum of 24 hours to kill the eggs, the larvae, whatever might be in there. And then you want to store it in moth-proof containers. Two compounds you can use. This is back on the market. And you use this, you put this in a sprayer and you spray it on them, and then you can store it, let it dry, and then store it on the wax. Or you can use paramoth crystals and put them in the supers, but you have to replenish this throughout the winter because it disappears in the oxygen as it's working in the hive. So about once a month, maybe 3 or 4 weeks, you need to replace that to help them get through the winter time. But shouldn't be too difficult. but you should do all you can. And you want to use this compound because this is approved for insects. You don't want to use mothballs. You want to use these two compounds here. These are the only ones that are approved for use with wax moths, with wax comb that you want to save through the winter. Reduce hive space, reduce the interest to 3/4 inch. I already have my nukes down to 3/4 inch. Actually, they've been down all year long. I have 2 nukes, and I currently have 9 full hives and 2 nukes. And I don't have anything greater than the smaller opening, which can be 2.5 to 3.5 inches on low. All my hives, I don't have any wide open right now. So you want to reduce it to 3/4 inch to get them through the winter for the most part on all your hives, or use a mouse guard. You can do that as well. The bees can get through the holes of this. The third thing is you want to control your varroa mites. Need low mite counts going into the winter. As I always ask people, do you know your mite counts? Use an improved miticide between July and December. There's a variety of ones out there. You can get a regimen. If you don't know what to use, talk with one of your mentor or someone else in the bee club, chat with a friend and kind of figure it out if you haven't. But I do not just go out and do all my hives. I've doing an integrated pest management approach to beekeeping for several years. And I find that much better. I believe that's also helped me use less poisons, I guess, or whatever you want to call the things we put in the hive. And it's also given me better outcomes as far as survivability. Now, I'm going to walk you through briefly. This is my monitor so far for varroa mites for this year. Up in the top right left-hand corner, those white spaces are the 7 hives that came through the winter time. And you can tell from there starting in February, I've done 6 mite counts so far. I'll do my 7th one next week. Every 4 to 6 weeks, I kind of do it, generally speaking. And I record the mites per 100 in there. And based on where I'm at, I will either treat or not treat. This is judgment based on data. I'm just not going out and treating them all. Judgment based on data I have in my hand. Now, if you look at February, I went ahead and treated them all. And I did that for a couple of reasons, because I wanted to get them through March and April, the honey flow, without having to treat. And most of them were high. I had a couple that weren't high, but I went ahead and treated them anyway. That's a judgment call I made. It's not necessarily something I would do based on the method of IPM of that standpoint. But I got through March and April. And then in May, I had a few hives. Actually, you see that W201, what happened is I had the top 2 hives. Actually, I had 3 hives that had multiple swarms. And I missed them. I didn't get those swarms. And all 3 of them ended up degrading quite a bit, had to build up, but W201 never recovered because it ended up getting laying workers. And so the way I handled that is I split it and put it on top of 2 strong hives, and they've recovered from that standpoint, but I lost that one from that standpoint. But I want to show you 2 things on here, and you said to hit the red button. Whatever, anyway. So if you go to 5.9, the third one, the blue, I guess that's blue, forming where it says Forming Pro, it says 10 per 100. You look at the prior month, there's only 2 per 100. It went from 2 to 10. If you go over here, look at July, in June, the one that's has 1.33 in June had 13.33 in July. I've had that happen multiple times. And one of the reasons why I've become a strong advocate of doing regular mite counts is because you can get what someone might call that to be a mite bomb, or something can happen where all of a sudden you get a lot more mites, or it could have been there was something wrong with my testing on June the 13th in that case. But that's why you want to do regular testing so you can catch those things. My hope is the one, if you go back on May 9th at 10, it got down to 1 in June. So that was successful. I certainly hope the one that has 13.3 next week when I test it, I certainly hope it's lower than that, but time will tell. But the point is, I got the data. Monitor varroa mites is very important all throughout the year. It's certainly important as you get to wintertime. Small hive beetle, kill all that you see and count them. I kill them and count them. So I got by hive how many I killed that day. But death to all small hive beetles is important. Jennifer's going to tell us a lot about that in just a few minutes. Wax moth, you see one, kill it and count it. And just verify no damage. Viruses on bees, do you see viruses? You'll get, as you keep bees longer, you'll get aware of some of them. You can look at it and kind of say, gee, it looks kind of funny. I ought to check it out. And anything that's not normal, check it out. If you can't figure it out yourself, call a friend and have them help you with that. All right. So that's monitoring for varroa mites and other pests. Ventilate the hive. Too much moisture will kill bees. Provide adequate top ventilation. Screen bottom boards left open. Bees heat the cluster, not the hive. You've heard that before. But I'm not trying to keep the whole hive warm. I'm just trying to help the bees do what they want to do, which is keep the hive keep the bees cluster warm and keep the queen in the middle warm, I still get blown away that it's 98 degrees in there in the wintertime or whatever it is. But you can look at heat things that, and they can prove that by showing you the color of the heat in there. In Wake County, you do not need to wrap the hives. So just put that aside from you. I used to say in North Carolina, you don't, but some of the guys in the mountains do wraps on their hives. So I just said Wake County, which is where we are. It's not necessary to wrap them. Hives must have good top ventilation to allow hive moisture to escape. And the way that Rick's method does, which I've adopted pretty much, is he starts with the Miller feeder. He puts the Miller feeder on top of the brood nest, and then he puts his inner cover on. The Miller feeder I turn upside down, so I have the space inside. So if I want to put some kind of granulated sugar or a candy board in there, I've got space already built in there to do that. And then you put the inner cover on, and then we put a screen cover on top. And that's because that'll give you ventilation along each side. That whole side on both sides is open. So the little hole in the center almost works like a chimney where the air comes out and comes out the sides, and you get much better ventilation than you would without doing that. And then just put a cover on top. I've done that 3 years. I've not had moisture problems, to the best of my knowledge in there. Every now and then you'll see a little bit of dampness, but usually it's on the inner cover on the top side of that. Not had a problem with that. You can also do other things. You can do a quilt box. If you do though, you got to still make sure you have room for ventilation. You can do a Vivaldi board for ventilation. You can do a Vivaldi board insulation. There's different things you can do. The point is you're trying to allow ventilation in your hive. When I first started, the wise older people were telling us they put rocks in the corner of their inner cover of their top to prop it up to allow ventilation. Is this method that Rick's come up with is a little bit more uses common equipment, and therefore you don't really have openings into your hive from that standpoint. Feed if needed is number 5. They need a winter food supply. You want 50 to 60 pounds of honey in your hives by November 15th. There's 2 ways you can do it. You can weigh the hive and do some calculations. That takes a lot of judgment and learning, and or you can count the frames of honey. I personally count the frames of honey. But if you want to measure it, you can lift the backside of the hive. You can use a luggage scale. You can use some other kind of scale and measure it, but it's subjective, takes experience to get the feel for it. So I believe it's better just to examine every hive, every frame in every hive that's got honey, and based on that, do an estimate. So I would say this is 100% honey. That's about 90%, 75%, 25%, and there's no honey on that one. So those are just examples of several frames. And what you do with that, then you take that information, you total the percentage together, divide by the number of frames to get the average percent, and then how much honey you've got in that hive. So here's the math. We assume a medium frame gives you 4 pounds of honey, a deep frame gives you 6 pounds of honey. And then it's just plugging in the equation, where at the bottom you'll say it's 6. If I have this is a math question. If I have a hive that is 2 10-feet frames and 40% of the hives are filled with honey, how much honey do I have? So 6 pound frame per frame times 20 frames, 120 pounds. 120 pounds times 40% is 48 pounds of honey. So that particular hive, we would estimate right now, has 48 pounds of honey. Yes. We record these. The recording will be up there on the website. The slides will be there. If you want an extra copy of the slides, I'm not sure I have a problem with showing those to you. So yeah, the hives will be, we're trying to put the stuff behind the members only section on the new website, and we haven't gotten that completely down, but our intent is to have that information there. Hopefully does that answer your question? Okay, feed if needed. Right now, it's 1-to-1, one part sugar to 1 part water for your sugar syrup if you need to feed. And I do that till September 15th. And September 15th, go to 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. And you want to go to thicker compounds so you don't have to dehydrate quite as much if you are going to feed. And then after that, we use just dry feed. I'm calling candy boards dry feed, as well as granulated sugar. You don't use sugar syrup, in other words. You just go to dry feed in December, January, February. From that standpoint. Okay, I use Boardman interest feeders for the most part because I can see them. They're easy to clean. I've only got hives at 3 locations, so it's not a problem for me to use Boardman. I do have Miller top feeders I use when I go on vacation, like I did last week. I've got 3 or 4 hives with Miller feeders on them because they're ones that need a little bit more boost from that standpoint. I used to use frame feeders. To me, you got to open the hive all the time. I just don't, but those are available. I know several people that use them. You can come up with other ways on top of your hive to kind of create a way to have a space to put sugar water in a contained space in the hive, just whatever works for you, what equipment you might have around that you can do that with from that standpoint. Pollen, you may or may not need pollen. I've never had to put pollen in because my hives have always had plenty of pollen in them. As a matter of fact, I think Chris has mentioned this. Sometimes our hives get too much pollen and you've got to, I like the way Chris Hegwood tells us to clean it out so you can reuse them, but you want to make sure they got pollen as well. Candy boards or bricks in the wintertime to feed them. I used this past winter, I used granulated sugar and that worked fine. They actually ate it, just put it on. If I turn the Miller feeder upside down, I might put a piece of cardboard in there or a piece of newspaper and just put powdered granulated sugar on top of that. All right, just to review, combine weak with strong, reduce hive space, control varroa mites, ventilate the hive, feed if needed. Any questions? Yes. You mean the bottom of the hive? Well, I use screen bottoms all year round. Yes, mine are open all year round. Yeah, the question was, do you take out do you make the screen bottom open just in the winter time? And I said, yeah, if you do use a solid bottom, I would open them up in the winter times. You have more ventilation. I use screen bottoms all year round because whenever I do a treatment, I always put a sticky board on there. So I want to see the efficacy of the treatment to see if it's killing mites or if stuff's falling down on that board. So I leave it all year round. Probably one more question, Jennifer. Now you can't ask too hard a question,
Okay.
Jennifer.
No. I'm curious about the biological spray to preserve the comb.
Yes.
I've never used that. How often do you have to spray? And then after you spray, how do you store the combs?
What I haven't used either, but Rick has, and he says you spray it once for the whole season. Is what he said. He said it used to be off market, but it's come back. He said it used to be off market. It's come back on market. I use the Paramoth myself. So Rick has used it. He says you spray once for the whole season, but he says. What now? It's good for multiple years, Mr. Hagwood. Yeah. Mr. Hagwood in the back said, for those of you online, he said that he uses that Bacillus. I can't remember what the second part of this is, but it works for multiple years. It lasts, and it's approved for use in wax comb for where we get honey out of. So I've been told. Yes. One more question. I'll let Jennifer up. Yeah.
How do you determine how much is too much space?
I'm looking at Danny here. Someone that the chat. Okay, the question is, how do you determine if there's too much space? The one up there I showed, the one on the top left and one on the bottom right. If I ran across the one on the bottom right and it was 2 hive deep and I was going to try to save it, I would immediately reduce it to 1 hive deep, for example. You can tell you should have this time of year. Somebody can tell me your thoughts. You should have your bees should be covered when you open it up 4 to 6 to 8 of the top frames in your hive. You should have bees pretty covering them, in my opinion. Any agreement, disagreement, or thought on that? Anybody have different number? Does that sound reasonable? Like that one I had on the right. Most of them, I've only got 1 hive right now that doesn't have that condition where they're pretty full. So I'm not going to do anything. But what's going to happen in the winter time? They're going to. Well, my goal is to keep 2 hive bodies going through the winter, but I have pulled out frames, so I only got 6 or 8 frames sometime instead of all 10. Last year I went down to nukes for one. I went to 2 nukes instead of 2 10-frame things to get them through the winter so they had less space. But it's judgment. You want to make sure you have plenty of bees. When you start seeing fewer bees, if they don't recover, then you probably ought to know, gee, I need to consider whether I want to reduce the space or not. The key from my standpoint is if they can't guard the front and they can't guard the top corners, you're going to have pests. So when you pull up the top, are they like today? I pulled up one and there were some hive beetles in the corners coming out, but there were all bees right there chasing them out. So you want to make sure you want to make sure you have adequate bees. I don't know. Anyone want to add to that? Give other thoughts?
Is this working? Yeah. Yeah, so just one thing. So sometimes you could tell from the outside of the hive, like just last week, I went by one of the hives and they weren't, I'm using the Boardman feeders and they were not taking the sugar water, at least not as fast as they used to be. I also noticed fewer bees on the outside. When I opened it up, I saw that the population was drastically reduced. So, I mean, just from the outside, I got that clue and I knew immediately I needed to remove at least one box. Of course, I shouldn't tell you this, but I'm kind of absent-minded sometimes. And there was a reason why this hive was lower populated. And that was because I had made a split. And that was the original location. I let them make their own queen. One thing you have to realize when you're making your own queen or letting them make their own queen, it's going to be 5 weeks or on average before you have a laying queen. And then another 3 weeks before you actually have bees emerge. So it's about 8 weeks. So that's a lot of time to go by, and and I just simply forgot. So I'm inspecting the frames. I'm not seeing any brood, and then I find a queen, and I think, well, all right, they must have replaced their queen. No, I did that. So anyway, so next up is Jennifer Keller. She's from NC State University. She's the apiculture specialist, and she manages all the hives out there. I think close to 100 hives probably. And so she helps students with their research projects, and she gives talks to people like us. And sometimes at State Fair, you'll see her in a cage, and she'll be presenting to people, and everybody's got their mouths wide open. Why is she not getting stung? Well, I just want to let you know they have let her out of her cage, and she is here tonight. So let's give a warm welcome to Jennifer Keller. Thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna turn this on. Ready? Okay, I don't want it to squeak. No. Right there. And the laser, it is there. Laser. All right. So I'm controlling. Okay. Awesome. Unless you need me to. No, I can do it. All right. Well, yes, I got out of the cage. Thank you for inviting me here. And on that note, I want to encourage everybody to participate in the fair because, I get to go to the fair and help. I don't really judge anymore, but I'm always there. And that's part of our deal to be there. And we have a big space to fill. And if we don't fill it up, we're going to lose that space. So please help your county in participating in the fair. There, I plugged it for you. All right. And then one other thing, I want to comment on the previous talk about monitoring for mites, because that was I love to hear people saying that they're going to monitor for mites because that's so important. One thing I just want to encourage is after you treat your hives, that's when I like to really monitor. Sometimes I'll forget a couple of months leading up to it, but after I treat, like I was away for 2 weeks, so I made sure to have my treatments in and they were doing their thing while I was gone. So this week, I'm going to go in and make sure my treatments worked, monitor, do some sugar shakes and check, make sure it works. But otherwise, yes, I love to hear, encourage people to monitor for mites. Okay, so on that note, if you don't monitor for mites, you might have a trouble with my pest that I'm getting ready to talk about, small hive beetles. So I did my research for my graduate studies on small hive beetles. And that was back in 1998 when they were first introduced. And we learned a lot about them that year. But unfortunately, I really haven't learned a whole lot since then about these things. We're still trying to figure it all out. But I'll tell you what little bit I do know. Okay. So they were first discovered, but they were not identified in 1996 in South Carolina. There was a sample taken, put into a jar. Somebody tried to identify it, couldn't figure out what it was, just sat on the shelf for 2 years until 1998, reintroduced in Florida. I guess I can look over here. Reintroduced in Florida, found in Florida that same year. It was well documented that this insect became a problem for beekeepers. I'll go into a little further on that one. So I was actually working on this talk on my way back from New York, and I was riding with Don Hopkins. And this little tidbit of info came up, and he told me, he's like, Lawrence Cutts, who was the Florida inspector, so like Don Hopkins' counterpart in Florida, he gave a talk here in this very building in 1998, the first year that the hive beetle was introduced. and nobody knew what it was yet. In fact, I think Lawrence brought some little samples of the beetle in vials and passed them out to everybody like, hey, if you see this, let us know. And it was actually from those little vials and of beetles, somebody in, I think it was Scotland County or Richmond County, was the first to find it here. And it was found in Hamlet, North Carolina, just a few months after that meeting. And it was because of that meeting that this person realized what it was. And at that time, we were the northernmost state until it was discovered in Minnesota. But it was like everything happened that year. We went from having no beetles to discovering the beetles to it wiping out, I forget how many thousands of hives in Florida. And it was at that point, everybody, all beekeepers just thought that was the end of beekeeping. That's it, we're done. Well, luckily we found out that's not the case, right? We're still here, still struggling with the beetles, but actually it's the mites that are still our number one problem as a beekeeper. The beetles are annoying nuisances, and yes, they can cause some trouble, but we're still prioritizing the mites. As if you can keep the mites under control, just like the wax moths, you can keep wax moths under control, and you can also hopefully keep your beetles under control. So that's a little bit about the history of the beetle. And prior to it being here, it was only found in Southern Africa, where it is not a problem. It's still not a problem. In fact, when they found out that it was here, they said, oh, well, they must be horrible beekeepers if it's becoming a problem. So we're not really sure what the difference is, the bees there, the bees here, but it is still not a problem there. All right, so here's a picture of the beetle. I was going to bring some in, but I got busy and kind of forgot about it. But I bet everybody in this room, if you have a hive of bees, you have seen the beetles, right? Yeah, I see a lot of heads shaking. I'm sorry. But yes, this is the small hive beetle, adult on the left. That is what most people see when you crack open your hive and you see that little, you might not get a really good glimpse of it, but you see something out of the corner of your eye darting. That's the beetle. They don't like the light, and they will scurry to get into the hive, out of the light and back into the darkness. And just for a size reference for the larva, that's about a full-grown larva at that point, and it's about the length of the adult beetle. And the adult beetle, people compare it to a ladybug or lady beetle, but it's not quite as arched. It's kind of more flat. I have a picture of them on a frame for size reference in a minute. All right, the other thing about the beetles, once again, this is the adult. Notice their club-shaped antennae. That's their telltale sign. Even for most people that, even if you need readers, you probably can still see these things because it's like this little bug running around and you see two things above it. Those are the club-shaped antennae. And some people can get the waxworm and the small hive beetle confused. I mean, so the larva confused. But I always say, if you see one, it makes probably the waxworm larva. If you see 1,000, it's probably the small hive beetle larva. Usually you don't just see one or two of the small hive beetles. They're usually very plentiful, and also they tend to group together. Even if it's on the bottom board, they'll be in one corner of the bottom board. If it's in a comb, they tend to go to one section of a comb and they'll kind of move. All right, so here's a picture of the beetle on a frame of honeycomb, just so you can see the size of it. Not very big. They easily can get into the cells and hide. You try to get them and they just run in and they're hard to squish, but you try. One thing about the plastic frames, I don't know if anybody here has not the plastic foundation, but the plastic frames, completely yellow frames. They often have this little weird slot down the side. I'm not sure why it's there, why it's not solid frame, but those are perfect for these little beetles to hide in. So I've actually gotten away from, like, sometimes we'll buy nukes and they'll come with the plastic frames. I would never purposely go buy them, but sometimes we get them when we buy nukes. And I will quickly try to rotate them out and get, regular wooden bar in there. All right, so here's the life cycle of the small hive beetle. Let's start with the adult, because that's what most of us see in our hives. And for the most part, it's not a problem. Just having adults running around in your hive, really not a big deal. Bees can keep them under control for the most part. But if something happens and the hive gets weakened, like if you have mites come in, or if you have a queen event and they're not able to requeen, that's when the beetles are going to start to take hold, take over, and they'll start laying eggs. All right, the eggs are often not visible. They hide them into cracks and crevices around the edge of the boxes, on the bottom boards. If there's a frame of brood that's not being guarded by the bees, the beetles will actually chew the cappings off and turn around and lay eggs under the cappings. And the only way you see it is you're poking around, looking at stuff, see what's going on, and I'll find a mass of eggs. That doesn't look like laying workers. There's way too many for that. So it's the beetles laying eggs in there. Eggs will hatch after only 24 hours. So they're in the beetle lays an egg, 24 hours later, it hatches into this teeny tiny little thing that you can't even recognize as a larva at that point. But they quickly start feeding on everything in the hive. They feed on the honey, the pollen, the honeybee brood, any brood that's left in there, the larvae, pupae, everything. And they just make a huge mess of everything. If you can catch it early enough, you can pull out the 1 or 2 frames that they start on. But if you miss it by just a day or two, then if there's any honey in there, it's just going to be like dripping down and ferments, and just they add this a fungus to it, and it just smells really bad. If you don't catch it in time, often you'll be walking through your bee yard and you might smell this weird aroma. And you may not know what it is, but you'll know something's wrong. It's almost like if you've ever made mead and you did a really bad job of it and it starts to get a twangy smell or something like that. That's kind of what it smells like. So that's what happens after the larvae feed for a few days. They actually take about 6 days to feed. They'll feed constantly for 6 days, after which time they'll be full, ready to pupate. So you see some of that little chunk of comb. Those are basically full-grown larvae ready to pupate. And they do this outside of the hive. So they're feeding inside the hive. As soon as they're done, there's a mass exodus. You can see them all crawling out the entrance or exit of the hive. And they pupate in the ground. So I like to warn beekeepers. Sometimes I hear them say they found all these worms on the bottom board, and so they just brushed them off. Like, no, don't brush them off in the ground. Okay, that's where they pupate. So you're just kind of speeding up their life cycle if you do that. So I like to throw them in the freezer, scrape them into a trash bag, throw them in a freezer. In a hot car, I've done that too, and I didn't have a freezer. Whatever you can, kill them. Sounds horrible, but I hate them. All right, so they pupate in the ground, and under ideal conditions, so like, warm conditions, humid conditions, they'll complete their pupation in 3 weeks. So you have 1 week, hold on. So 1 day here, and then they feed for 6 days. So 7 days after the beetle lays the egg, they can then pupate in the ground, where it takes 3 more weeks. So like 1 month, you can go from a few beetles to a gazillion beetles. That's really quick process. They don't do well in the wintertime as far as pupation. So if it's too cold, that length of time, if it's too cold, they'll die. But if it's cold, and they will take a lot longer to pupate. Or if it's not humid enough, they don't pupate very well. Any questions about the life cycle? All right. So here's a picture I just took recently, unfortunately. This was a hive. It was healthy about a week before I checked it out here and found this frame. And I thought it was doing really well. But what happened was it had swarmed, and I knew it had swarmed, and I was letting it requeen itself. And who knows what happened, but the queen didn't exactly, the process was not completed. And so they did not have a queen, and they started going downhill. And that's when the beetles took over. And I found this. It was disgusting. This was about 2 frames worth of beetle grubs like this. So I was able to save most of the comb. I pulled those 2 frames out and got everything off the bottom board, put them in the freezer, and I saved the other 7, I think it was. One I was like questionable, but I also put those in the freezer just to freeze, just in case there was anything in there. If I'd put those over on my stacks of equipment on Paramoth, who knows if there's something in there, they may have continued to develop. And I don't want to lose my whole stack of equipment, so just freeze them. Can everybody see that yellow dust under that hive? That's kind of dark here, but there's this like pollen powder underneath it. Yeah, it shows up better over here. Check that out. Because it's really kind of important to be able to identify this. This was a hive, and I say this, I found this at 5 o'clock on a Friday. So, and I knew right away, just because I saw that pollen out front, that I had a problem with small hive beetles. And as much as I wanted to get out of there and go home for the weekend, I knew if I came back Monday, it would have been way too late. So what's going on there is it's the very beginning stages where the beetle grubs, the larvae, start to chew, and they go through the pollen. They really like the pollen. That's their protein source, just like the beetles. And they chew, and it drops down. And at this point, there's still bees in there. The bees are trying drastically to clean it out. And, you know, they're trying to stay ahead of the beetles. And they'll get to the point where they can't. But at this point, you know, this is the very beginning stages. And so if you can catch it early, recognize it, this is a problem, go in there, you know, hopefully you can find what frame the beetles are on and take them out, squish the bees down. We'll talk about that in a minute. But as long as you can recognize it early and take action immediately, can't wait on these, unfortunately. Same thing if you find a dead out in your hive, I mean, in your yard, you know, it's like, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow or the next day. And I used to be like that. Unfortunately, it's like, no, you got to do it right now. Just do it, pick it up, put it away. Either, you know, you don't want wax moths in there, but you also, for me, it's more about beetles now than ever before. So here's a picture of what I was talking about. These are the beetle larvae. I think this one actually was on the bottom board. Sometimes when you go in and you pick up the box off of the bottom board, if there's been a lot of pollen coming down, then you may not even see anything. It's like, oh, that looks like a lot of pollen sitting on the bottom board. And then you take your hive tool and you scratch it, and it's like a ball of spaghetti, but they're alive. Sorry, I'm glad everybody already had dinner here. But yeah, that's exactly what it looks like. And sometimes you can't even see them underneath there. So that's another important element to my beekeeping practices now is I don't care if my hive is level or not. I don't care if it's tipped one side or another side, but I really, really cautious about having it tipped backwards. So if the entrance is here, I never want to have it tipped up. I always want to have it tipped slightly forward, because bees seem to do better keeping their bottom boards clean if it's tipped forward. They can drag their debris out better. If it's tipped ever so slightly backwards, that debris tends to congregate in one corner or the other, and that becomes a wonderful hiding area for the beetles. And we don't want them to be able to hide anywhere. We want the bees to be able to, you know, keep them under control, clean them out. Okay. So here's a picture of the beetles after they started their pupation in the ground. This is a controlled, I mean, this is like a little container about 4 by 4. that we were just playing with to see how they, how deep they go. And, you know, I think a lot of the literature out there in the beginning was talking about how the beetles, they'll only dig down about an inch. They crawl out of the hive. They made it sound really nice, like, oh, this will be no problem. They said that the beetles crawl out of the hive, go straight down, and will pupate under about an inch of soil. Well, so of course, everyone tried different things to figure out, well, what can we do to control these things? Can we put them on concrete pads? Can we put them on a driveway? Can we put them in the middle of a tennis court so they have to crawl very long distances? Well, it turns out that they can crawl very long distances. In fact, when they were in the quarantine facility, I was telling somebody this story earlier, they were in Cary, there's a quarantine facility before they were everywhere throughout North Carolina. We reared them in the lab. And one day they got out of their container, they crawled through their water moat that we had them sitting in as a preventative, and they were crawling down the hall. So they're very tough little critters. And it's, you know, it's not enough to just have them sitting on concrete, because they'll crawl far enough to get to the point where they can burrow into the ground. And then the other thing is, if you ever have them in your yard and you get to the point where you have the larvae that crawl out, take your hive tool after a few days and dig around and see how deep they go. I mean, they don't just go an inch. And it may have to do with the density of them. You know, maybe the first ones crawl just a little ways, but then as it gets more and more competitive, they have to go further down. But they can go down like 6 to 8 inches down in the ground. So, you know, we used to have what was the drench? Not Checkmate, the guard star. It was a soil drench that was supposed to kill the larvae around, which does work. However, you just have to have so much to get it to drench the soil that it's kind of not really practical unless you only have 1 or 2 hives. But it's they dig pretty deep down into the soil. But if you can reach them at this point where they've started their pupation and disturb that soil, you can interrupt their pupation and kind of affect, if you can get to them. So I'll try that sometimes if I know I've had an outbreak and I didn't catch them all, I'll do that. So since the introduction of the beetle in the United States, there have also been about as many kinds of traps as you can imagine. This is one of the first ones. This was the hood trap, and they all kind of still use this principle where I said that the beetles like to run away and hide. The bees also kind of push them around the hive, and the beetles are always looking for somewhere to get away. So the idea here is that you fill this reservoir with, there's all different things: mineral oil, vegetable oil, apple cider vinegar. I've heard all different kinds of lures, but the idea is that there's a slot down the center and the beetle will crawl in there, get trapped, and die. So that's how it's supposed to work. And you get some. None of the traps that are on the market are 100% effective, but every beetle that you can get out of your hive, I think, is a good thing. And everyone that you can crush with your hive tool, great, but I have too many. I'd be there all day playing whack-a-mole. So this was the first one that was on the market. The problem here is, like, there was supposed to be comb built in around the trap. And of course, you know, when you leave open space for bees, they never do it the way that you want them to do it. So this was a problem. And let's see, so this is another one that I think you can still buy this. This is called the West trap. This sits under the bottom board. Well, you integrate this into your bottom board. There's actually a rim that you add to any regulation bottom board. Probably solid works better than screen bottom boards for this. And so the black thing on top is nothing more than a propolis trap. Underneath that is a very shallow tray. You fill that with mineral oil, vegetable oil, once again, I've heard different things. So, and then you put the hive on top of that. And I will say that this is actually very effective in some regards, but it's also a pain to work with. If you've ever tried to carry a tray of water, you know how hard it is to carry a tray of water without spilling it. And if this hive isn't perfectly level, then the oil runs to one side or the other. And if the bees become in contact with it, then they also get coated and die. So if you can get your hive perfectly level, this does work. I like to try this just for temporary, like when I'm doing an inspection, I'll have it sitting on my leveled cinder blocks. And then when I'm taking the top box off, I'll set it on there and kind of smoke it and push some of the beetles down. I figure once again, I get a couple out of it, handful here and there. The beetles are running to get away. So that's how I like to use this, because it's too hard to move around. But it does work. And also what starts out as a really good trap, I found out the hard way. If you leave it on too long, they fill it up, it gets filled up with debris, beetles, everything else. And so then it becomes a really good hiding place for the beetles. So it's not meant to be a permanent fixture underneath your hive. But I do like that one. All right, next one, I'm gonna kind of promote it. I actually don't know the name of this one. Anybody? Beetle Blaster. All right, thank you. There are too many, I can't remember them all. These are meant to be disposable. You can use them in vegetable oil. Once again, they slide down in between frames, and beetles don't always go to the same spot. Some hives, they like to go in the bottom box. Some hives, they like to go in the top box. If you can figure out where they are in your hive, that's where you put this. And it's kind of funny. I mean, just hive to hive, they have different priorities. I don't know why. But this is another one. You'll get some beetles. I mean, you can see here, there's probably a couple hundred in that one. And that's a good, get them out of your hive. All right, here's my new favorite one. Has anybody tried these? I see a few hands. This is a Swiffer pad. I didn't really believe that it would work. I'm like, that's not going to work. Tried it, and sure enough, it does. I will say there's a few tricks I've learned, and I'm still doing trial and error things on these. First of all, you need the dry, unscented Swiffer pads. I didn't even know that there was not a dry until somebody told me to make sure to say that. So dry and unscented. And then I used them many times and just threw them on top of the top bars and then put my inner cover on. And I didn't have great results. So I was like, I didn't know what was going on. Why isn't this working? Somebody then told me to put it in with a rim or a spacer or something, add a little space above the top bars and between the inner cover. So this year, when I treated with Apiguard, you have to have a spacer on for Apiguard. I was like, well, let me try them then. And this was actually from this year. So this is how many I got. And that was after a few days. I have a really big problem in my yard. Hopefully nobody else has them this bad, but like I get a ton of beetles. Yes, ma'am. I don't have a picture of it. So there's yeah, so the question is, what is my setup? What does she mean by spacer? So when you treat with Apiguard, you can't just put the 10 of Apiguard on the top bars, and they need air flow. So you have to either use like an empty super or some kind of a rim. So my rims are about 1.5 inches all the way around. So there's extra space. Like if you used it in the spring, you'd have, all kinds of comb. It'd be really bad. But right now it's not that big a deal. So there's extra space so the bees can get in there to the Swiffer pad and really try to get it out of there. They don't like this in their hive. They want it gone. And so they're trying to tear it up, and they make it all really fuzzy. And the beetles, they have these really sharp claws on the ends of their legs, and they get stuck in there and they die. And I don't feel sorry for them. I'm sorry. They give me a hard time all year long. I don't feel bad. Any more? Does that make sense? Do you understand? Okay, awesome. Do I do the ApiGuard and the pad at the same time? Yes, I did this year. First time. Well, actually, previous years I was using ApiVar. So this year is ApiGuard. So it worked out really well. If I was to try, I would do it again. Like I'm done with the ApiVar now. But if I had a hive that was bad with beetles and I wanted to use a Swiffer, I would not have a problem this time of year giving them a little extra space to make this work. I would not try it in the spring, like I said. Yes. I've heard other people talk about just rubbing it on rocks to rough it up. Can you use Velcro to stimulate roughing it up? So I've heard many different ideas of how to get it roughed up, but it doesn't take long. I mean, seriously, it's like a day and the beetle, I mean, the bees are already on it trying to get it out of there. So he uses a wire brush over here. So, and that makes it rough enough or like fuzzy it up. Yes. Oh, that's a great question. So like I said, I'm still doing whole sheet is the question. Do I put in a whole sheet? I'm still working on that. I haven't decided what works best. I've tried a whole sheet. I've tried a half a sheet. I've tried little strips. And I don't think I have a picture, but has anybody else heard about the Dynamo Bounty sheets or something like what? I forgot the name. Anybody? It's Dynamo Bounty, like paper towels, but they're like the shop towels almost. That's another thing that's on the market. And I'm trying those, cut those in strips also. So I don't really have a great answer. Just try it, see what works. And once again, I'm not sure sometimes if, I put them up on the top with a spacer. I run double deeps. I think it would work just as effectively in the bottom, but I don't want to have to pick up 2 boxes to get it to the bottom. So, stuff it in there somehow, but then you have to fish it back out. So if anybody else has better ideas, let me know. You have a question?
If you put them in between your deep boxes, they get localized, and then when you go to branch off that top box, which you kind of
Hang on.
if you put the Swiffer sheet in between the 2 deep boxes, when you go to peel it off and to remove that Swiffer sheet, it can result that the bees get very upset because the bottom box will lift off of your hive stand sometimes because the Swiffer sheet like Velcros the boxes together.
Yes. Yeah. So I don't have to repeat that one, right? Okay.
Hey, Jennifer,
Yeah.
the other thing you got to be careful with is where you put it. If the queen can get in there, then the queen could die. And I've had trouble with that over the winter, even though I'm putting it off to the side. I think the queen has been getting into, I think, was it Rick? Somebody had this suggestion of putting a queen excluder below that and putting it above a queen excluder. Just a thought.
Yeah, no, I have heard that too. I've not been that careful yet. I'm like I said, I have a problem. I'm willing to take the risk, but no, a queen excluder, yeah, that would definitely work. And then between the 2 boxes, I think that's part of the problem I had with, when I was first trying it, putting it directly underneath the inner cover. They were just propolizing it. So they need some space. So either on top with space or on the bottom board, they have enough natural space. But yeah, if anybody figures it out, let me know. All right, moving on. So Kumafos, I hate recommending this, I hate even mentioning it. However, it is really the only thing that's on the market labeled for control of small hive beetles in the beehives. So I will mention it, and I'll also say, don't use it, please. It's a bad chemical. It's an organophosphate. It's one of the ones that came out. It was actually brought onto the market as a emergency Section 18 for the varroa mite, because that was back when Apistan was showing all kinds of resistance, or the mites were showing resistance to Apistan. And then this was also used for the beetles. It's used as a strip similar to the ApiVar strip, where you hang it down in between frames, or also there's means of stapling it onto like the corrugated plastic cardboard type of stuff and sliding it on the bottom board, because beetles like to hide under something, and the thought is that they'll hide in there. It works if they come in contact with it, but as we've already mentioned, beetles are everywhere in the hive, and the bees tend to corral them into certain areas. They'll corral them into this corner and then almost like propolize them in. We call it putting them in jail. And they're stupid. They even feed the beetles. But yeah, so the Coumaphos won't actually kill all, and it gets into the comb. I mean, it hasn't been used for quite a while, but it's still found in residue, wax residue, when their researchers are testing to see what's in our waxes and what kind of chemicals. And we're still finding a lot of Coumaphos, as well as fluvalinate, which also hasn't been used for years. So those are the two that we're trying to, keep out of our hives. That's it. Yes. Say that again.
So people will see the brand names. They'll see Checkmate,
Checkmate.
and then they'll see Apistan for the fluvalinate.
Yes, sorry, you are correct. Coumaphos, that's the chemical. Probably if you look on any of the beekeeping websites, you'll see it as Checkmate. And Apistan is the first miticide that was on the market. Fluvalinate is the chemical there, and that's really not used anymore because the resistance was so bad that we've learned our lesson and trying to use all these other things and rotate around so we don't use one, so they don't get resistance. All right, other things that we could try that don't really work. Nematodes. Has anybody heard about the nematodes for beetle control? Yes, are you trying it? And? Did not work? All right. No, I mean, I really wish it could work. I wish we could develop a better means for this to work. And Deborah Delaney in Delaware has actually done some work and has tried to get nematodes successfully reared, placed into soil around hives, and has done so, but she says it's just such a challenge. He has to have the pH just right, soil just right, and it's just way too many factors for it to be realistic. So, if you see that for sale, I would try to stay away from that. Diatomaceous earth, I've heard other people try this, and it will harm beetles, beetle grubs. It will also harm your bees if they're on the ground, unfortunately. And also at this point, to kill the beetle grubs, I mean, yes, we want to kill them if they're down there, but it's also too late for your hive. Probably by this point, your hive's probably already been attacked and gone if you've got that many beetle grubs, larvae. So we really need to figure out what we can do to catch and kill and trap the adults before they cause that much trouble. Most of the devices that are used as traps on the market are limited. They like I showed in my pictures, you can catch some of the beetles, kill some of the beetles. Anything you get out of your hive is a bonus, but don't expect 100% kill or gone or whatever. You still have some in there, but whatever you can do to help is great. Beetles hide everywhere, and so that there still be some in there. Okay. How much time do I have? Okay. We got to 11. Oh, great. I could probably talk that long. No, we're getting there. All right. Things you cannot use. All right. I've heard this. Roach bait. Fipronil. Yeah, fipronil. Please don't put fipronil in your hives. It will not only kill beetles, it will also kill your bees. And it's very bad. It's very bad. If we ever get to the point where this is found in honey, if it's sold and found in honey, it will come back and hurt every beekeeper out there. So we just don't want it. Just don't do it, please. Okay. If you hear if any beekeepers doing it, please educate them as to why we shouldn't do it. I mean, first of all, you don't use pesticides off label in the first place, but we're putting this into a potential food source, and we don't want it to cause great harm. All right, so what can we do? Well, there's a few things we can do as a beekeeper in our bee yards. And I have to remind myself of the first one a lot because it's so tempting when you find burr comb, you want to scrape off the tops of your comb or frames before you put the lid back on. It's so easy to just flick it off and maybe on the edge of the woods or somewhere. But that's an attractant for beetles. Okay, so we don't want to encourage more beetles. And it won't be guarded by bees, so they would have free range of that. So if you can carry something around with you, either a bag or an extra little bucket, something, and whenever you scrape off burr comb, just collect it and put it in there. Hey, and then you can go put it in your wax melter and then you'll have extra candle making supplies. So it's a win-win. Minimize the time inspecting the colonies. Now this one is tough because we all have things we want to look at, things we want to do in our hives. But it has been shown that the beetles can detect the alarm pheromones of the bees. And they recognize this and will zero in on certain colonies if there's more alarm pheromones than others. And that's how they kind of pick their next hive. And they can detect it from quite a long ways away, apparently. So if you can minimize the time you're inside the hive, that would be better. All right, so remove excess supers. We used to just extract honey, put the supers back up there, and I would leave them all winter long as the bees could take care of them just as well as I could by putting them, like you talked about, paramoth and all these other things that you now have to use to get them through the winter. If they're not on the bees, you have to make sure the wax moths don't get in there. So I used to just leave them up there on the beehives. So I'd have like 4 empty supers up there, but it was fine. Now that is a perfect place for beetles to hide out because if they're not going to be bees throughout there, then the beetles can live in there without being harassed. And that'll be just a great place. And we don't want that. We don't want places for the beetles to hide. I already talked about this one. Don't brush larvae on the ground. So if you find beetle larvae, if you find adult beetles, if you're like combining colonies, you have an extra bottom board, check the bottom board. If you have anything on there, I like to have the big black trash bags on hand. You can just slide the whole, the bottom board will slide right into a trash bag and dump everything, scrape it down, and I tie it up and put it in a freezer. That's what I prefer to do. Don't brush them around. So place hives in sunny areas. How many people have your hives in the sun? How many have them in the shade? You get away with this, that's great, but it's been proven not only for small hive beetles, but also for varroa mites, some of the diseases like chalk brood. Bees tend to show lower levels of a lot of these problems if you keep your hives in direct sunlight. And I like to say that the beekeepers are the ones that like the shade. Bees like the sun. So if you have the option, that's where I would suggest you do it. Now I know that that's not always possible. Some people have limited space where you can place your hives. They'll work anywhere. I will say I do notice when I put my hives on one edge of the yard that is shaded for most of the day, I do tend to have more beetles there than the ones that are sitting out in the middle of the yard. Match comb area to amount of bees. So this was already covered very well, and I couldn't agree more with this one. If you have like I have 2 deeps, if I only have 5 frames in the bottom and 5 frames in the top, and they're ignoring the outer ones, I'm going to get rid of 1 box, squish all the bees down into 1 box, and just make them control the beetles, keep them at bay, cover all 10 frames, and they just do much better. And I don't know about you, but when like in spring, when spring rolls around and you open up a hive and you're like, it doesn't look so good. But maybe there's 2 boxes and they're all spread out versus you go to the next one, there's only 1 box and you pop the lid and they're just like boiling. It just looks better. And I think they do better over the winter that way as well. Well, actually all year long, but it's hard in the spring to keep them that way without them swarming. But if you can like I like nuke boxes as well. If I have a single deep that's not full, even if it's like 7 frames, I'll squish them into a 5-frame box and take out 2 frames. I mean, I'd rather have it overflowing than not guarding all my frames. You combine anything that's weak, combine together, already well covered. I've been doing that a lot already. I mean, you said wait till November. I've already started because I can tell they're not going to make it. I don't feel like babying hives through the winter. I'd much rather combine a couple together and not have to feed them as much all winter long, not have to worry about them. And then in spring, you know, if you can get them through the winter, they're going to take off and come February, March, April, and then you can split them. So the key is just to get it through the winter, do whatever you have to do. And control varroa mites. This is also very well covered already. Yes, so, oh, that's not me. I only have one more slide. You want me to hurry up? But if you control your varroa mites, this is pretty key. Lots of times after October, the number one reason my hives die, other than starvation, sometimes it's my fault, but usually it's because of other factors. And lots of times it's just, I wasn't on top of the varroa mite situation. And it's usually too late by the time I figure out what I did wrong. So, you know, stay on top of it. Like I said, if you're treating with something, great, but go back and verify. Do a sugar shake or 2 afterwards. You don't have to do every single hive if you can't. If you can do every hive, great, because sometimes there are outliers. But if you can do just 1% of your yard even, just make sure that stuff worked. Maintain strong population. This is my last slide, and I just threw this in here to show what I consider a strong hive. We have a frame taken out, so otherwise it would be 10 full frames of bees there. That is a strong hive in my opinion. So, you know, it's another good reason to go look at your neighbor's bees with them when they go inspect hives, because you might have what you think is a good hive. And then you look at their hive and like, oh, maybe mine isn't as good as I thought, or vice versa, right? So it's really good to look at as many hives as you can. Go to your county's field days, go to other counties' field days, you know, just look around. All right, that's about all I have. I'm sure I forgot something, but if there are any questions, I'll go ahead and take some. Yes, sir.
I've read that since small hive beetles can't hover, that entrances that capitalize on this difference between bugs versus insects in this case can be an effective way of preventing the problem in the first place. Thoughts on that?
Bugs.
So, you know, two-winged insect, 6 legs versus the small hive beetle, which has the back that flips up and lets a single set of wings come out, and that they cannot do certain aerobatic things the same way biologically than bees can.
So you're saying that the bees should be able to guard better against the beetle?
No, that the bees, as you're flying into the hive, the
Yeah.
bees aerodynamically can do different behaviors in terms of flying than a small hive beetle, and that the entrances that, for example, have a guarded cover that require a 90-degree turn that the hive beetles cannot do is an effective means of preventing infestation in the first place.
So I mean, I've not heard that. It's an interesting theory, but I will also say that I use robbing screens on my hives because I have so many bees in one yard. The robbing is pretty crazy at certain times of the year. And in that situation, it is a screen and the bees have to go down and in. So it's much more than a 90-degree, and I still have beetles. So I'm not sure if that is what you're referring to, but if that's what it is, then the beetles have figured out my screens.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's all it is, that would be great. So if you want to work on that and let me know.
I just bought one.
You bought one.
So
Okay. Well, let me know.
At the summer meeting, there was a guy named David Miller, and I don't know if he owns the company, the Beetle Jail Company.
Mhm,
but
yeah.
This thing is actually called a Beetle Jail. It's not the little plastic trap. but it's an entrance that goes on the front. And then there's a shield over top of the entrance to keep bees and bugs from flying in there. They have to land on the landing board, and then they have to go under the shield, and then the bees can go up over easily. But the beetles have to, they'll just go straight under this little slit, basically, and they go in there, and then there's a trap that they fall into, and they never get into the hive. I should have brought one of the.
Okay.
I didn't install it
Hey,
yet. I
I'm
bought it.
game. I'm game to try anything new that get rid of these things. So let me know.
Beetle jail.
Beetle jail.
Yeah.
I
But
will-
you know, I can't put one of those on every hive. They're $35, and then there's more that you have to buy to attach it. It's basically another board. But yeah, I don't want to do that on all of my hives.
Right. All right. Well, we'll see. Any other questions or ideas of how you keep them out of your hives? I heard people talking that they had trouble and they were waiting for me to give them the answers. And I know I didn't give you an answer. I'm sorry. I'm still trying to figure it out.
I have a lot of small hive beetles. I've heard peppermint can help. I've seen people putting peppermints in their hive that's supposed to just deter them. I haven't tried it.
I haven't even heard of that one.
Yeah.
That's,
No, peppermints, like the little red and white.
yeah, I've heard of
candies.
cinnamon, but I've also not heard that it works.
Yeah, I know I've heard cinnamon for ants, but I haven't really heard of anything
Yeah.
for beetles.
Summer conference, someone mentioned that the candy has other things than peppermint oil in it, and it could be harmful to bees' digestive system.
I actually forgot to mention something fairly important about pollen patties, pollen supplements. I don't use too much pollen either because it seems like our bees are always bringing in pollen. Even January 1st, when it's warm enough for them to be flying, they're bringing in pollen. But if anybody does feed pollen, that is ideal small hive beetle food, right? Put a big fat, it's like a cake for beetles up top. And if it's too big for the bees to use up in a very short period of time, the beetles will put eggs in there and start rearing larvae. So if, like, on occasion, when I have to feed for different research projects, we take very tiny amounts of pollen patties so that they'll be consumed within 2 days and go back and reapply after they're done. So, you know, I mean, you used to put it in like one the size of the top almost. Just put it in there and leave it. And if the bees ate it, great. If not, fine. But now you could never get away with doing that in my yard. You couldn't anyway. Maybe up north. Although in New York, we saw some small hive beetles. Nothing like I have here, but we did see some in the hives up in New York. I think they're pretty much around the country now. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Okay, so beginning of this year, we started doing this thing. It was what Jim Knox used to do. It was like what you should be doing in your hive this month. And Chris Hagwood started that, and then he was teaching a class on Tuesdays, and so he wasn't able to come for a few months. But we want him to do that again tonight since he's back here on a regular schedule now.
So you guys have gotten a lot of good information tonight about preparing your hives for winter and about dealing with hive beetles. So there's really not much else to cover, I think, this month, other than just making sure that you're feeding, because I do get an opportunity to peek into new beekeepers' hives frequently, and I am kind of unpleasantly surprised that people don't often recognize their bees are starving when their bees are starving. They kind of make an assumption that bees will find something somewhere, or they're not sure about the frequency of feeding. So I'll just tell you that if you've got a feeder that will hold about a gallon and you fill that once a week, it's not going to be too much. It may not be like sufficient to get them prepared for winter, but it's probably not going to be too much. So somewhere in the neighborhood of a gallon a week this time of year works really well to get the bees by and allow them to build up a little bit of surplus. So I'll just add that on top of what's been spoken of tonight.
All right, thanks, Chris. And you have Danny James.
How many of you caught a swarm this year? I would highly suggest that you requeen it this month. You've got about an 80% chance of not making it this year because that queen didn't swarm for nothing. So now's the time, if you want to keep that swarm, to let it survive the winter, requeen it.
All right, thanks, Danny. And of course, if you haven't treated for mites, and you know, as Gordon said, right now I'm doing my treatments.
That leads me to ask Danny one question. How late can you would you requeen it? When would you stop or no longer requeen it?
Question is, about mid-September. Keep in mind that the queen now is starting to lay the winter supply of bees, the super bees, so to speak. So if you're letting that old queen lay, she's not going to be laying enough to start with, but a new queen will immediately start laying the correct number of bees for one thing, plus the super bees will be in a process, because see, it takes how many weeks for you to get to 3 weeks it takes to get to that first bunch of eggs hatching out. So if you're doing it now, you're talking about in September is when you're getting your first supply of the new bees anyway. I'm sorry. I will. That's the way I do. In fact, I just requeen yesterday. Yesterday we requeened 4. 2 of them were swarms that we caught this year, and 2 were old ones that I knew were just not going to make it this winter. So I go ahead and requeen them now, if you can find the queens. Thank you.
Yeah, so you probably don't want to like just kill a queen and then have them make their own queen. Although I am actually doing that as of last week with a laying worker hive. But I plan to add, I keep adding brood to it, and hopefully they'll recover. It was a lot of times when I say a laying worker hive, I'll just forget about it. It's just not worth saving. They're usually too far gone. But if there's a lot of bees there, it might be worth saving. And I've got other hives that I've been feeding, and they're fairly strong, so they can afford to give the brood. So, you know, hopefully, like I said, it's 8 weeks, you know, when you're making a new queen from scratch before you see new bees emerge. All right. So. Yeah.
So Danny mentioned winter bees. Next year, maybe just prior to our preparing for winter presentation, I want to do a meeting on the triggers when the queen knows and when the nurse bees know to make winter bees. And that was covered a little bit in the summer conference, and I've been doing some reading since, and I think that would be a good meeting topic for next year. You know, as we're transitioning, you know, as Dana says, you know, there's the first half of the season is the hives are increasing. After the solstice, that's when the colonies go into decline, and there's a complex series of triggers that drive the creation of the winter bees. So we'll get into that next year.
So that's probably David Burns, right?
I think it was.
Yeah, it was David Burns. Yeah, David was, he was suggesting putting protein in the sugar water. And that was, well, because, you know, the main problem we have with protein right now, you put a patty on the hive and it creates small hive beetles. Small hive beetles love that. But if you put the protein, like a protein powder, what was he recommending? The brood builder, I think is what it's called. And he's got a recipe. If you go to YouTube and search for David Burns and look at some of his videos, he says it works. I haven't tried it, but he used a teaspoon of brood builder and a teaspoon of honeybee healthy. And I think the other one was amino bee booster.
Right.
I think Amino Bee Booster and Honeybee Healthy are made by the same company. So anyway, it's just something to build up your bees before winter.
So both David Burns and Bob Benny talked about feeding this time of year with weaker sugar water, weaker than 1-to-1. It would be 1 to as much as 1.5. And that has an effect on that transition to winter, making winter bees and the health of the colony going into the fall, and then eventually switching to 1-to-1 and eventually to 2-to-1.
Yeah, so Bob Benny was saying that so if you're feeding with a thinner syrup, like a 1 to 1.3 or 1 to 1.5, that the bees have to process that more. So they're putting in more enzymes, and one of the enzymes, what is it? Glucose oxidase, and that makes gluconic acid. So it makes the honey acidic. So it's a different, it's different than if you added like a real thick syrup, like 2-to-1. 2-to-1 syrup, they're not going to have to process as much. So that it's probably not going to be as acidic. It's not going to have as many enzymes in it. But anyway, he said you get really good results. And I think he referred to some study out of India that demonstrated that you get more buildup with the 1 to 1.3 at this time of year. Okay, any other questions or anything we need to talk about before we do our raffle? So we only have 2, or it's not a raffle, it's a door prize, but we have 2 door prizes. And since there were only 2, we didn't pass out any tickets. So now we're trusting our audience to be very honest. We need to find the 2 people that have a birthday closest to today. I was born August 9th. Wait, the lady in the back. August 7th. Okay, that's pretty close. And I got an August 1st. Anybody closer than those 2? All right, that's it. We have our 2 winners. What's that? What are they? Hellebores. Okay. Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming, and I guess we'll see you next month.